I'm your host, Taylor, an occupational therapist passionate about sharing valuable insights and inspiring listeners on the power of occupation. Get ready to expand your knowledge, challenge your perspectives, and be inspired by the stories of resilience, determination, and success. I'm very interested in this academia section. I don't know if, well, you wouldn't know this. I don't think anybody knows this, so people listening will get the first dibs. Before I decided to do travel therapy, I was actually applying to academia positions, and I had a lot of, well, not a lot. That sounds a little dramatic. There wasn't a lot of Zoom interviews for different OT programs to teach as a professor. So some of these questions that I have in here are my own. I'm just interested to hear your response.
That's perfect. I can totally see you in academia.
Oh, thanks. Oh my God. It's like it. I love teaching. I love OT, first of all. Love OT. But I love teaching and I love interacting with students. I feel like students challenge my perspective and thoughts as a clinician and help keep me fresh and in the know, So I guess so you've been doing academia for a while. How did you know you were ready to go into academia? Like, is it one of those things where you just don't know and you just go for it? Or did you think, okay, I'm at the time in my career where I can do this now?
I don't know if you're ever ready, to be honest, or if you ever know that you're ready. And I say this after 10 years. And I say this even after 10 years and being a professor. And for those of you who are not sure about like the ranking system, like you go from like instructor to assistant professor, associate professor, and then full professor. And just like this week, I became a full professor. Yeah, like I got promoted.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So like even like, and I'm not trying to say that to brag. I'm trying to say that
Yeah.
even as like a full professor now, I still don't think I'm ready. So versus like when I first started 10 years ago, because I still get nervous, I still lay awake at night and I wonder, will my lectures or presentations put people to sleep? Will it make sense? And I don't think it's a bad thing because I think it just means that you still care, you know? So my honest answer is I think you're ready when you care and you have the heart for academia and you have the heart for teaching. So Taylor, it sounds to me like you're ready, you know?
Well, I was gonna get to this a little later. I actually have I've been invited out for an on-campus interview, and presentation at a university that won't need someone till next fall. So I have more questions about that. So I'm kind of at this point in my life where I'm like, what's happening? Are we doing travel? Are we doing academia? Who knows? So thank you for going over the hierarchy, if you will, of or the progression, maybe not hierarchy, but the progression of being an academic. If someone's interested in teaching, do they start by reaching out to, let's say, like their alma mater to maybe teach a course or do adjunct? Is there a preferred way to go about getting that experience?
I think not necessarily, but I think that certainly makes it an easier path. And that's because if you were there as a student and you're an alumni, hopefully they know you and they know about you, and they know the quality of work that you did as a student. Which can translate over to your quality of work as an instructor. So I think that's probably one of the easiest ways. But you don't necessarily have to go that route. But by all means, you can apply to other schools and other programs and whatnot. But we recently just hired 2 new faculty members in my place at West Coast University, and I think a big part of that was because we knew them prior; they were alumni, and they happen to beat out like more experienced therapists. Like the ones that we hired are maybe considered entry level or new graduates, but because they were so impressive during their capstone and during their time as students, we knew that they were going to be dependable. We can rely on them. Their culture fit the workplace culture. So it was a very easy decision for us, I want to say.
So that's actually encouraging to hear because I had always, and other people too, had wondered, if schools care about your years of experience as a clinician. My personal thought is that years of experience doesn't make you a good clinician necessarily. Across the board, I've seen people who have been practicing for years and years and years. And I'm like, I don't know if I would necessarily do it that way. Not saying that, my way is the best way, but So I kind of think of it in that regard when it comes to schools, but maybe schools are looking for people to have more clinical experience under their belts before they dive in.
I 100% agree with what you say about like experience. Like just because you have years and years of experience doesn't necessarily make you the ideal candidate for that position, you know. Because if you really think about it, at some point everybody gets experience, everybody gets years.
Yeah.
But like what qualities do you bring to that institution that they really value, you know, and vice versa, like what qualities does the institution have that you really value so that you can see that it's a good fit and a good match. And if you have those intangibles that they really care about, so going back to what I said earlier, if you have the heart for teaching, you really care about your students and their success. I think it's hard to argue with that. You know, I think that beats out any clinician with years and years of experience who comes across as the expert, but they don't make that connection. Whereas you, who love to teach, and you who like connect with your audience, I think you know teaching is certainly in your wheelhouse. Even if you haven't done it or you don't know it, I think you have it in you for sure.
Just gonna boost my egos while we're talking. Well, and because I think that's kind of something I had thought about too, is I don't have teaching experience except for uh Ryan, and I think it's LaValle is his last name on Instagram. He had done this workshop. He teaches as well, and he had made a comment that people who have different realms of social media, whether that's YouTube, you know, a blog, Instagram, whatever, that is actually a form of teaching, and you don't
Mhm.
realize that you're teaching. And to me, I was like, oh, I've been, because I would say I've taught maybe 2 guest lectures, and other than that, I have no teaching experience. So when I was applying to these academic positions, and even in the interviews, they're like, what's your biggest weakness right now? And I was like, I haven't taught. You know, just full transparency. But so what would you say to that, to people who like myself say, I have no teaching experience? Do I have a shot?
Well, I do think you have a shot for sure. I going back to what you said earlier, like even on social media, even your posts on Instagrams or the stories that you post, and you're teaching something for
Mm.
sure. You know, the presentation or the media behind it might be a little bit different than what is traditional, but that's new and evolving, and that's what we've actually encouraged other faculty to start adopting. That we can't just,
Oh,
yeah, like we can't just teach from a PowerPoint and have a 3 hour lecture. Like we actually have to be quite a bit more dynamic. So you're actually ahead of the game a little bit in terms of integrating all of those different things. So definitely don't undermine that level of teaching because it's going to be helpful. And it's helpful probably now as well. And I think just even your experience doing guest lectures, you know, that's still something that certainly counts. I think a lot of programs might see that as well. Okay, well maybe you can start off as a lab assistant,
mhm.
or maybe like an adjunct instructor, but to take a full blown course as like a professor or the primary instructor, it might be they might be cautious about it just because like when it comes to teaching, it's not just about the presentations. It's about grading papers. It's about managing
Mhm.
students. It's about like all of these other behind the scenes work that you have to do that is not just about the presentation itself. So there might be some concerns there, but I think, um, you know, like once again, if you find a good fit and if you are in a program that actually values your qualities and they know what you bring to the table. I mean, I've seen instances where some people just get hired right away as like an assistant professor
Mm.
um, without that teaching experience per se, but they have some other clinical qualities that they bring and a lot of knowledge in a certain area, and it ends up being not a big problem.
Again, this is good info for me. I should have came and talked to you like 5 months ago about about all of this. Can we kind of talk about the progression or like the hiring process for an academic position? Like let's say for like an assistant or associate professor. So you see the posting online, you apply for it. Let's say they accept you. What is kind of the progression from there?
Well, usually, and I can't speak on other programs, but I think what is typical is that the dean or the program director will be the one to reach out to you first. They'll review everything in terms of your resume, and maybe they'll even have a simple phone interview with you just to make sure that it's that you're a good candidate for the interview. Um, because when you have a position and you have like maybe a dozen applicants, we don't necessarily want to interview every single applicant because it takes up quite a bit of time. So
Yeah.
there's sort of this screening process. And if you get called in for an interview, you know that at least there's some interest there for sure.
Mhm.
So whether that's something that you said in a phone interview or your resume or just whatever experience you bring, like there's definite interest if you've been called in for the interview. Then comes the interview, and usually with that, as you may know, you have to do a teaching presentation. Most likely, they want to
Which makes
see.
sense, right? Because if they don't like how you teach, then you know why, or if you have a hard time teaching, that maybe right now is not the time, or maybe they're okay with helping you with that part.
Sure, yeah, absolutely, and like it's not. I don't want to say it's make or break, but it is going to be the biggest part where
Mm.
you have to demonstrate your skill to actually teach, right? Or if maybe you're lacking there, but again, you have other qualities, like you have a lot of clinical experience in a particular area that the program is looking for, they might want to bring you in as like a lab assistant or somebody who's adjunct, and you can start to gain that experience, you know? So it's not necessarily make or break, but it certainly is helpful. And then some programs, including ours, will do a group interview.
Mm.
So it's not just the program director one on one with the potential hire. I want to say in most cases, I think and like a lot of programs, they have the other faculty there, so that they can ask questions and they can just sort of see if this potential candidate is going to fit the culture of the workplace.
When I'm kind of asking these questions because this is coming up for me. When you do the presentation, is there a specific topic that you have to present on, or is it left up to you, or is that dependent on the university?
I think it depends on a university and what they're intending for you to teach, possibly. Like if there's a class that they want to fill and they want to make sure that you have competency in that class, then maybe they'll request something. But I want to say in most cases, it's up to you. But it's not just on anything. And I say this because like we've seen some really funky interviews where, or we've seen some really funky presentations where they're teaching something that is completely out there and completely random. Like we've had one interview in the past, and I don't know if they're listening in, but they were going over like the different cooking instruments out there. Like this is like the difference between aluminum versus like I don't know, cast iron, etc., which I thought was
Okay.
very interesting, but you want your presentation to be about OT for sure, or something
Yeah.
OT, more OT related.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, that's good to know. I'm waiting to hear back which route we're taking, if it's a we give you the topic or a you choose the topic that you want to present on.
Got it.
Um Talking about different institutions, I and my experience just interviewing, which again, take it with a grain of salt. What is a difference in your opinion between institutions that are more research based versus ones that are more teaching based, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that, your workload is certainly going to be different in terms of which load is more dominant. Like when I taught at USC, which is a more research-based institution, the expectation was a little bit more scholarship, a little bit more research and service. I still did quite a bit of teaching there, probably the same amount I do now, but I think they do place a stronger emphasis on, attending conferences and doing presentations and publications and whatnot. At West Coast University, there's a lot less pressure because we're mainly a teaching institution. We don't have to do a whole lot of research. But if you actually want to get promoted, if you want to go from assistant to associate or associate to full, the criteria is you have to publish. You have
Mm.
to do some research. So even though there's not a strong emphasis there, for promotion, it's still a required thing. So ultimately, there's I guess if you really take that into perspective, there isn't that much of a difference, but maybe in terms of your actual workload, like I want to say, excuse me, I spend about 80% of my role as a professor now teaching, and like maybe 10% in service and 10% in scholarship. Whereas before, maybe at USC, it was about 50 in teaching
Okay.
and then like 25, something like that, if my math is correct.
Yeah. So, okay, that's interesting because I was wondering how your role as a professor is divvied up like throughout the year or even semester to semester. Because I know from my program, from my OT program, there were only a handful of courses every semester, and we had a lot of faculty. So it almost seemed like you were teaching one course a semester. Is it more than that? It couldn't be
It
less.
can be. Yeah, no, it definitely can be. So if you on your faculty team, like you'll have I don't want to say core faculty, but I guess that's what they really are, and that's what they're called.
Mhm.
Like your core teaching faculty, who you probably have instructors who are uh, like they're dominant in the curriculum, like they're all over the place.
Mhm.
So those are your primary teaching instructors or professors, and then you'll have ones who maybe you'll see once every couple of years who just happens to pop up, and their role is mainly research, and they're just teaching like a class, maybe even related to research or something else, maybe neuroscience or hands or whatever. And the main thing is to secure grants for the university or to publish. So their role is maybe like 80% research and then 10% teaching and 10% service. So you'll see not every faculty will have the same workload when it comes to percentages.
Mhm.
So that's something that can be talked about like during the interview, but probably like when you're closer to being hired and you're having your one-on-one meeting with the dean or the program director to talk about your responsibilities.
Um, these are all really good answers, by the way. I'm soaking all of this in. I had heard for teaching institutions that, actually, I think it's an A code standard that there has to be a certain number of like PhD professors versus someone that has like an academic, like an OTD. Is that an A code standard? I can't
Well,
remember
yeah,
now.
that is an A code standard. So just to clarify, like you have your terminal degree, which right now is the OTD. So
Hmm.
you don't necessarily have to have a PhD because the OTD is still a doctorate. So if you are, let's say you are in a master's program, and you're offering a master's level course, MSOT, then theoretically, like all of your, or I not all, but I want to say that half of your faculty have to have that terminal degree. So they either have to have an OTD or they have to have a PhD.
Hmm.
So that's half. The other half can be MSOT, and you can be an instructor with an MSOT degree if that is what your program is offering. It's a little bit different if you are now like trying to teach in a post-professional OTD program, or it's a little bit different if you are an entry-level OTD program. You can still teach there as an instructor with an MSOT, but then now the criteria is a little bit different because um, it gets a little bit complicated and awkward if you have an MSOT and now you're teaching OTD students.
Tell me if this might be wrong. So for a CODA program, you can have your MSOT or your OTD in order to
Yes.
teach, correct? Okay.
Absolutely.
At MSOT level, you can have your MSOT or your doctorate.
Yes.
And then doctorate level is doctorate. Let's say you're matching the equivalent degree or higher that you're
Pretty
teaching
much,
at.
yeah. And you can still get away with having your MSOT and teaching in that OTD program. But you might not be the primary instructor. You might be like maybe a secondary or a lab assistant or an adjunct or something else
Okay.
entirely.
The difference between tenure versus non-tenure tracks.
To be honest, I'm probably not the best person to answer this question because even now, as a full professor, I don't have tenure.
Okay.
So I think it depends on your program. I think tenure is more so for the researchers on the field.
Mm.
But if you are strictly for like if you're strictly in the teaching role, which is what I'm in, it's very likely that you're not tenured. So I
Okay.
don't really know. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've always been confused by that too. And when I was looking at academic positions, some of them in the description would say like option for tenure or, something like that. It's like I don't understand. Like
Mhm.
what are you wanting?
And I think the ones who are the positions that are more tenured, like the expectation there is less teaching, but a lot more research, so
Okay.
that you can secure grants for the program.
So my I guess this is my like own personal question, is my biggest fear if doing these interviews, they say, what's your biggest fear? My biggest fear going into academics would be that I don't love it as much as I thought I would, you know? So when you apply to these positions, is there a set time that you have to stay with the university? I know sometimes they outline it in the actual application, but is there a standard of practice, if you will, of how long you have to stay there, if it turns out not to be your cup of tea?
That's interesting because I don't want to say that it should be that way for any university or institution or program, because I think that's the way it is just in life in general, right? Like any job as an OT or any job anywhere. If it's not really your cup of tea, do you really want to spend that much more time,
Yeah.
like trying it out, right? Because I mean, I'm the first to admit life is short, and you don't necessarily want to, invest in something that is you feel it's not really working out all that much. I think it's worth giving it a shot, because things are different trimester to trimester or semester to semester. Maybe for whatever reason, it was just a really rough trimester or semester, and I've had those, and a lot of the times I'm like, oh my gosh, I think that was my last one, I'm done, and then the next one starts and I'm like, okay, no, everything's fine. So I think at least in terms of teaching, you want to give it maybe trimester or semester, just so that you really really know. And that's just teaching in terms of like the classroom. But if you already feel like, you know what, like this is just not for me because the culture is really strange, or like I'm not really connecting with the university itself and our priorities are different, I don't necessarily want to say that it's taboo to like leave in the middle of the trimester.
Mhm.
I think you're free to do so, and I think it's fair. If it's compromising some of your values or your mental health, I think you have to prioritize that. But I think, yeah, for sure, giving it a shot. And like even before committing, try to have some of these, try to have some of your concerns addressed before you even start,
Hmm.
like if you have an opportunity to shadow someone at that university or to work there as a lab assistant just to see how things are going, you can start connecting with the students and you can really see the quality of students in that program. And if you like really have a good feeling about them, I think that that's really a good sign.
Hmm.
If you already start having red flags like during the interview, then you don't even bother.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's actually super encouraging to hear. And sorry, hit my microphone. You make a good point of how I guess I don't know, I always saw like academia, I can't leave it once I go into it, but I like the point you made that it's similar to any other job where if you get into it and it's not what you thought, I wouldn't leave in the middle of a semester. Like that would give me anxiety for the students. But that's just the little doubt in the back of my head is,
Sure. And I mean, like, you're not saying goodbye to academia forever. You can go from
yeah,
one program to another program, right?
yeah, that's true. Well, okay, and so that's another thing is, you know, academia is pretty much always there and always available to people throughout the life of their profession to go into academia. So, not asking this for myself, but what would you say to somebody who is still pretty early on in their career looking at academia? Is it to our benefit to continue getting more experience, or if it's go for it, or what's your wisdom?
I think everyone's going to be different, so I can just share what I've been through.
Yeah, that would be
Um,
great.
I when I first started in academia, I didn't know if I wanted to really be in academia. Believe it or not, it was because I was still working as a clinician. I was actually the supervising OT at my clinic at the time. And when I first got like the teaching bug, like I was a fieldwork educator for students and whatnot. I'm like, okay, I like this. Like maybe like I'll start doing some guest lectures and maybe like I'll teach like a class or something or be a lab assistant. So I had that in my brain. And then when I was offered like a chance to actually like be more full time, like at USC, they offered to pay for my OTD while I like taught classes for them and
Hmm,
like
that's cool.
they were trying to groom me into becoming a professor there. And even throughout that process I was like, is this really for me, is this really for me? Like I miss clinical work, or at least full-time clinical work. I never stopped clinical. So and like even now today, like I always look back like, like is this still really for me? But I've been in this for 10 years now. But it doesn't mean that you have to stop the other things that you really care about or that you really want to do.
Mm,
So like if you want to do private work, or if you want
yeah,
to work per diem or part-time somewhere else, I think, and if you're able to do that with your schedule, then by all means more power to you, right? Like you don't have to just be married to this one thing unless you want to be.
that's actually good to hear. My one of the questions I had been asked at one of the academic interviews was like, "What's my dream position or like my dream job or whatever?" And my answer was to be able to teach and do aquatic therapy. Like I would do that like literally all day. So it's nice to know that flexibility, I guess. And I'm
Yeah.
sure it depends on the demands of whatever university that you're at or whatever program that you're at. But that's nice to hear that. Oh, especially you, because you're teaching, you have private practice, you've got the course. Like that just makes it more, what's the word? Encouraging? I don't know, but that like it's possible.
Yeah,
You don't have
it's
to.
possible, and I think for me it needs to be possible because I can't just do the one thing. Like
Yeah,
I have
I
to
feel that on such a spiritual level.
diversify for sure. Yeah, I mean you can teach aquatic therapy also, right? Like
Oh my, I sign me up in a heartbeat. I would do that. Hands down. Give me a pool and yeah, I mean, wow, that would be amazing if that was built into programs. There's wishful thinking.
we in my program we actually have like one day in
Oh.
one of our courses where we do aquatic therapy.
No, that is so cool. Oh, because I didn't know about aquatic therapy till I went on field work. Because my CI, she had her aquaticist certification. And I was like, oh man, I wish we probably grazed the surface of it in school, but that's cool that you guys offer that. That's a I'll just go back to OT school and come to your program.
Yeah, well we only do it for a day, so we're
But
grazing
still,
just as
that's
well.
I think just it's like a I don't want to use the word addiction because that's like a negative thing, but I feel like once you see the pool, you're like, oh, that's cool.
It's a passion,
A
right?
passion, yes.
Yeah.
Am I also addicted to it? Maybe a little bit. um, if you're comfortable and you don't have to necessarily use your numbers, but are you comfortable sharing average starting salary for, let's say, assistant, associate, full-time professor? If you're not comfortable, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't think I'm allowed to like really give explicit numbers in
Mhm.
case anybody from my workplace is listening. So I'll
Yeah.
I'll definitely give ranges. I don't know how accurate they are because I'm notoriously really bad at negotiating a salary.
Mhm.
And like 10 years ago when I first got into academia, I actually took a big pay cut,
Mm.
which at the time I didn't realize if it was a pay cut or not. But I've always heard that in academia, you may not make as much as a clinician. So just putting that out there. I don't know if it's a big difference, but back then, like so 10 years ago when I first started out, like I can say because I don't work there anymore, like my starting salary as a professor was like 85K a
Okay.
year. And with like the workload was a little bit different, the schedule was a little bit different compared to like a full-time clinician, but still 85K compared to what I was making, like leading my like OT like department, like I was making like six figures. I think it was like 105 or something like that.
Mhm.
So it was a pretty big 20K difference when I
Yeah.
got into academia. Um, and then like even today, like I hear alumni coming back, like they're only 1 year as an OT, and the salary that they're making now is higher than mine, you know? So it's just I think sometimes that's to be expected, you know, and all the more power to them. I think it just really depends on your institution and also like where they're working. They could be doing travel, they could be doing home health, and they just have a very high rate or salary.
Hmm.
But
That's true.
I think and you know like I know some assistant professors starting now, and they're higher, they're much higher than what I started, like they're hitting 90, 95, even 100, whereas I started at like 85. So like I'm glad to hear that at
Hmm.
least they're getting some bigger salaries. So I think all that to say is, in terms of the numbers, I think for an assistant professor, which is the starting, probably about 90 to 100, something like that. For the average associate, maybe 100 to 110.
Hmm.
And then for like a full professor, maybe 110 to 120. So
Okay.
there's probably a 10K jump, a 5 to 10K jump for each rank.
Hmm. I mean, and that makes sense too. And you mentioned it before. So are those numbers negotiable or because, and the reason I ask this, I feel like everything should be negotiable. But when I
Mhm.
went to my first job as a clinician, as a new grad, they did not negotiate. They said, this is the rate we do for new grads, and you either take it or leave it. And I tried to negotiate, and they were like, as we said before in our previous email, there is no negotiation. So ever since then,
I
I always wonder like if everything is actually negotiable.
I think it's worth trying, but I think also from the other side, because like I have a private practice, I help run CNS. I think like if because there's a budget for everything, you know,
Right.
and if they're maxed out at their budget, which we are a lot of the times, then I would at least like to offer somebody, if I were in this position, the highest possible salary that I can give based on the budget.
Mm.
And then if I were to say to somebody this is not negotiable, it's because like I've already like
Maxed
run the
out.
numbers, yeah, and this is like what it is at max. But if they are saying that, you know, yeah, I guess there's some like we can negotiate this and let me try to move some numbers around, so on and so forth. Then maybe they just had a range in mind, like they weren't necessarily trying to give you the max. So I think it's always worth a shot. But if they're saying like, you know, like we're stuck on this number, it's probably because like that's where they are in their budget. Like there really is no movement.
Hmm. That makes sense. Okay, two last questions for you. One academic, one not academic. Uh, what would your advice be to someone who is like a first-time professor?
You have to love it, you know, like you really have to have that heart for teaching, as I mentioned earlier. And the reason for that is because you're gonna have really, really great days, and then some days are, you know, you're gonna feel like, wow, why did I get into this? And as we just talked about, the money probably won't pull you through, you know, like you
Yeah.
might even think like, wow, I could make more as a clinician, or work somewhere else, or as an entrepreneur even. So I think like you really have to love the profession of teaching as well, so that it can really like save you during some of the tougher times. And you know, like that's not to say that there's not going to be peaks and valleys. I think when it comes to this profession, like there's a lot of peaks and valleys in any profession, but I think we feel it more as OTs because we're so immersed in it, you know, like
Mm.
we give our all. And it's hard to tell someone like, oh, it's just a job, try not to take things personally. Like you give yourself to this profession, like that's what therapeutic use of self is, you know. And I think you see that a lot as a professor. So I think if you're first starting out, like you really have to have that love for teaching. You have to like want to see your students succeed. If you're, and I've seen this quite a bit, like some people get into teaching because they want the easier schedule. They
Mm.
think it's an easier schedule. It's not that easy, much easier. Or they don't want to do physical work anymore for whatever reason. But I'm still like lugging wheelchairs and machines around, you know, so
Yeah.
it can get pretty physical still. And like you're practicing techniques that you would in the clinic. So like there's still quite a bit of hands-on. work to it. So I think if you're not getting into teaching for the right reasons, like you can burn out very, very quickly. So I think, if you have the passion for it, then it's a good fit. If you can get mentorship from somewhere, either somebody in the program or your colleagues, then I think that's always helpful, because you can, um, like it'll help you with the good and the bad times.
I just want to say thank you for answering all of these questions between the CNS course and especially with academia. I know there was a lot there. I have personally found this extremely helpful and comforting too. A question that I like to ask of everybody, our final question, is what impact are you hoping to make in your community? And that community can be defined by however you see fit for yourself, but what impact are you hoping to make?
Hmm. That's a
I didn't
great
include that in
question.
the questions that I sent you.
No, but that's a great question, because I like that's a bigger picture type of question, right? Like that's beyond thinking about what I'm going to do today, or what I'm going to do next week. That's almost like a legacy question that
Mm.
I think a lot of people should think more about. And I barely think about, because I'm kind of like in survival mode a lot of the times, and I'm just thinking about what I'm trying to do today, and get through my week. But like, what is it all for, right? And I hope that, like, everyone is trying to impact their community, like whether that's like the bigger community as a whole, or maybe like a smaller one, like maybe your own circle, your friends or family, or your colleagues or students if you're a professor. Yeah, thanks for that. Like, it's actually starting to really get me thinking. I hope that the impact I make is that, like, whoever I come across, and it's going to be students most of the time now, that I inspire them to just be themselves. Because oftentimes I feel like we're always under pressure to be something or someone we're not, and then we live the life that wasn't really intended for us, and then it becomes very stressful and damaging. So I hope that they're comfortable in their own skin, and they do the things that they love, and then I hope that they impact those around them as well. So for, like, I guess my community right now are like my colleagues and my students at my academic program, and I hope all of us like have this really positive, awesome synergy where we can impact each other, so that it goes to our patients, like they get the best care. And when I say best care, I'm not saying like the most competent care, that like expertise. I'm saying like real genuine therapeutic use of self. You're engaging with each other as one human being to another human being, and you're just being very kind and gracious to each other. So I hope that, because a lot of the times I'm cranky in the classroom, and I think my students see that. So that's my goal, I guess, for 2023. Like I hope I could be a more positive type of influence and have more positive energy, and I hope that they bring that energy to their people, their community as well.
I love that. We're all a little cranky every now. Some of us might be better at hiding it than others. If people want to get in contact with you, what is the best way? Like if there's any follow-up questions or questions about CNS, how would you prefer they reach out?
They can email. They can also reach out to us via social media. We're on Instagram. We're not great at Instagram. Like like there's a couple of us who run the page, but we don't know what we're doing. Like
Ah, you guys do
I
great.
I just learned how to like post stories, and to like, I didn't know there was a swipe up option, to
Oh,
like actually
yes.
have reactions. So yeah, I'm learning all that stuff. So you can try to send us a message there, and we'll get back to you if we can figure it out. But I think email is probably best.
Remember, the power of occupation lies within each of us, and together we can unlock its transformative potential. If you've enjoyed our discussions and want to stay connected, be sure to subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas, and suggestions for future episodes. Thank you for being a part of this community, and until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep embracing the power of occupation and making a positive impact in the lives of those around you.